With the help of Hashem, we are learning Beitzah Daf Yud Beis. We are up to Beitzah Daf Yud Aleph Amid Beis. We are 7 lines before the bottom of the Amid. We had in the Mishnah on Daf Yud Aleph Amid Beis the machlokes regarding taking off shutters, replacing the shutters on Yom Tiv, and we had the way this machlokes is recorded in the Mishnah. And we're going to have something that we had a few daf ago, that we have Rab Shimon ben Elazar that had a different version of the machlokes of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Again, as we will see, that how the shutters were affixed to the booths with tzir, with the pivots, with one pivot, with 2 pivots, with no pivots, will substantially affect the application or this case where Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argue. That will be the ending, so to say, of the sugya of Daf Yud Aleph. And Chevra, Daf Yud Beis is a very important daf. It's very simple, but we're learning a foundational rule. Danny, you were looking for the word before called mitoich. The word mitoich, Baruch, means since. But that's a very key word. Since means, in the context of the laws of Yom Tiv, that, as we quoted in the beginning of the tractate, that in Parshas Boy, I know we're speaking about Pesach, but it's about all of the holidays. The Torah that says that one may not do work, the Torah says, Kol malacha lo yeyasu bahem, you can't do work on Pesach on Yom Tiv. However, asher yeyachel l'chol nefesh, that which is going to be used for food stuff, right? You can do what you need to do to prepare food on Yom Tiv. So food-related melachos, the word melacha meaning that which normally may not be done on Shabbos and on Yom Tiv, is permitted for Yom Tiv. No one debates that. It's a verse in the Chumash. However, how far do we extend it? So here's basically what's going to be the crux of the matter. Mitoich, Beis Hillel will say, Mitoich shehutra l'tzoyrech, since we are allowed to do a certain activity for food-related purposes, that, so to say, reveals that that activity is not that serious when Yom Tiv, as far as Yom Tiv is concerned, and therefore it may be done even for non-food related activities. Mitoich shehutra l'tzoyrech oichel nefesh, hutra nami sheloi l'tzoyrech. Beis Shammai doesn't subscribe to this whole principle of mitoich. Now we're going to speak out, this is very important, a 3-way argument amongst the Rishonim. Beis Hillel, whom we paskin like, we just learned that Beis Shammai is not even a Mishnah. How far do we say it doesn't have to be for l'tzoyrech? So the most limiting application will be the sheet of Rabbeinu Hananel. There has to be a mitzvah need. I'll give you an example. You're not allowed to transport Shabbos and Yom Tov, Hoitzah, right, the beginning of Masechta Shabbos. But I can take food from my house to your house, from your house to mine. Oichel nefesh, I can violate, so there's no violation of Hoitzah. Hoitzah is hutar. Mitoich, according to Beis Hillel, will only mean that I can transport something for a mitzvah. So if you need a Sefer Torah in a shul, you can carry a Sefer Torah. If you want to carry a baby for the baby to have a bris, you can carry the baby. If it's non-mitzvah related, you can't do it even according to Beis Hillel. The other end of the spectrum is Shitas Rashi, and we're going to learn Gemara Rashi. Rashi holds that even if there is no need at all, Shaloi l'tzoyrech klal, it's permitted. The in-between opinion, which is the Rabbeinu Tam and many other Rishonim, they say, listen, there has to be some need. It's called there has to be some need for Yom Tiv. It doesn't have to be for a mitzvah need, but there has to be stam, you can't do it. Okay, that's going to be the topic on Amud Aleph, with many other details to that. And just a quick finish the intro on Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis, we're going to have a whole different topic. But we already mentioned it before. Number one rabbinically is not allowed to tithe produce on Shabbos, on Yom Tiv. Why not? Because you are fixing it. You are rectifying it. Okay, it's not discernible, correct? It's not prohibited midoiraisa. It's not makeba patish midoiraisa, but it's prohibited midarabanan. But coming back to food-related things, foods that you are allowed to make and you made on Yom Tov. For example, you needed a dough. The dough did not exist before Yom Tov. You were unable to separate challah. Now challah has the status of truma. Everyone agrees that you could and you have to separate the dough on Yom Tov. In the case where you made the dough on Yom Tov. I'll give you another example. When you slaughter a behema, when you slaughter a domesticated animal, which is cattle, which is cows, oxen, calves, and goats and sheep. So there are 3 parts of the animal. the zroya, the lechayayim, and the keva, the right foreleg, the jaw and the tongue, and the stomach called the keva, they have to be gifted to a kohen. Guys, theoretically, even nowadays, there's reasons why we don't do it. It's not so simple. Now, the separation of these three gifts, we call them the gifts, is something that normally may not be done on Yom Tov if you slaughter the animal prior to Yom Tov, but you can shecht an animal on Yom Tov. Same concept. Since you did not have access to these three parts, to the gifts, you could separate it on Yom Tov. No one debates that. Question that we will learn is, when the Chazal said don't separate Trumas or Maasros on Shabbos and on Yom Tov, generally included in that prohibition is to deliver it. Whether you separate it or not, even if you separated it yesterday or 2 days ago, you also have to deliver it. Chazal says don't deliver it. Now on Shabbos it's harder, but on Yom Tov, don't deliver it on Yom Tov. Question will be, what about the gifts that you were unable to separate prior, like challah? So we will see there is a machlokes whether you are allowed to deliver them or not. And again, there's going to be a lot of nuances. What happens if, according to those who opine that which you only came into the world on Yom Tov, like challah, you couldn't have separated before, that you could deliver. If you're going to say, while you are delivering today's challah, can you already deliver yesterday's challah or not? There's going to be a machlokes b'shamai and b'silol and many different ways of applying that machlokes and much, much more. But the big daf yud bey, the topic that's the most relevant, is the mitoich. That's the ground zero, but we're going to start on daf yud aleph amid beis. We left off again 7 lines before the bottom of the amid. Let's quickly come back. The topic here is about removing and replacing shutters on these vendors' stalls that were movable. So it's called a halachic keli, whether you may or may not, machlokes b'shamai and b'silol. Says our Gemara, Masnisen Deloy Kehai Tana, that there was another Tana, which is Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, that had a whole different version of the argument b'shamai and b'silol, not the way Rabbeinu HaKadosh put it in the Mishnah. What does Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar say? The Tanya of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Moed b'shamai and b'silol, everyone agrees that you are allowed to remove the shutters on Yom Tov. Wow, everyone agrees to that. The only argument is regarding returning it. The whole reason why we allow you to take it off in the first place is in order for you to have more food available. Simchas Yom Tov. Once the food is available, that's it. And as we learned in the last year, theoretically, he also would have put a limit on it. But because of hitiru soifan mishum tchilasan, if we would prohibit the final phase, you wouldn't even do the first phase. We want for you to be comfortable doing the first phase. We allow you to do the final phase as well. So first of all, already it's different than our Mishnah. According to his version, everyone allows you to remove it. Now let's go further. When the shutters are attached by pivots, avol ein lehem tzir, if there are no pivots, which means they were never really affixed, so when you remove it, it's not really called an act of stira, of removing or of dismantling. When you replace it, you're not really building, then there's b'chlal not an issue mutter. 3 lines before the bottom, but we learned in another Beitzah, that is where there's an argument. But if you have pivots, everyone holds that it's prohibited to replace. Upa. And there's a brilliant solution. The brilliant solution is that if there would only be with pivots or without pivots, you got a contradiction. All we need to do is we got to make 3 scenarios. 2 pivots. 2 pivots means, wow, like 2 hinges. It's really affixed. 0 pivots, shvachamaises in Yiddish, and the in-between. Oh, Gavaldik. So it says Abaye, 2 lines before the bottom of the Amid, like this. If the pivots are on its side, which means it has 2 pivots, each side has a pivot, then Divrei HaKoil Asud, it's prohibited to replace. Guys, you are allowed to remove. Even Beis Hillel will hold you cannot replace. That is explaining that Beitzah. Right? Beis Hillel, you can't replace it because that's really building. If there are no pivots, then everyone agrees that you can replace it. The argument is there is 1 pivot And Daf Yud Beis on the top. Mar Sover, that's Beishamai, Gozrin on Sir Be'emtza Otzat Sir Menatzad, even though he also theoretically would subscribe that one pivot, one hinge is not called a proper building. It should be permitted, but if you will allow this, a slippery slope, you'll allow that. Umar Sover, the Loi Gozrinon. And Ashi speaks out therefore how you make the Beitzah of Rab Shimon ben Elazar and the other Beitzah Mamish work one with the other. And now with tremendous joy, Chavre, we are starting the sugya, the topic of mitoich, sins, which is huge, because indeed we paskin like Beis Hillel, and it's not only that regarding food-related activities, there are many things that we are permitted to do on Yom Tov, which is why we have a standalone Masechtas Yom Tov, which we call now Masechtas Beitzah or Beya, but we apply it even to non-food related. Says the Mishnah, the case of the Mishnah is concerning carrying, transporting. Mamish, like Shabbos begins with transporting, so we introduce the mitoich regarding the general prohibition of transporting, and this case that the topic will be a mitzvah, a hoitzah, transporting something, transferring something for a mitzvah sake, but not food related. You may not carry a minor. We're speaking about carrying a minor, an infant, for the bris milah, even though it's a mitzvah. You may not transport a lulav. Nor a sefer Torah. In other words, even though it's a hoitzah, transporting, carrying, mitzvah related, so what? It's not food. Now I want you to know like this, just to appreciate this. If you were to open up the Mishnah by yourself, you could have certainly understood that they are arguing whether transporting is a prohibition on Yom Tov or not. If you remember in the beginning of Shabbos, right, what did we ask? The big question was, why didn't Masechta Shabbos begin on Daf Ayin Gimel? Go through the 39 melachas in the middle of Klal Gadol, the Mishnah. Why did we begin with the prohibition of hoitzah? So Tosfos says, hoitzah is called the malacha gerua. You know, the way we defined a malacha means you are transforming something. When you carry something from one domain to the other, you didn't transform it at all. So one would have argued it's bechlal not called a malacha. And as the Gemara is going to speak out, one might have understood that maybe Beishamai and Beis Hillel, no one holds of mitoich. No one says the words mitoich. Maybe Beis Hillel simply holds that there isn't a problem to carry on Yom Tov. To make sure that that's not the way you understand it, Tanach, there was a teacher of Beitzah that he quoted the following. It says in a Beitzah, that if you slaughter a private donation oila, sacrifice on Yom Tov, you get flogged for breaking Yom Tov. Now hold on. Those sacrifices where the Torah says bimoyadoi, that have to be brought at a specific time, which are the communal karbanos, are allowed to be done, and indeed it's done on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. You bring all of those karbanos. You bring the kamer tamid, you bring the kamer musaf. Private karbanos may not be brought on Shabbos. But what happens if you have a private carbon, but people get to eat from it? The moment you get to eat from it, you can do it on Yom Tov. But a oila, the definition of a carbon oila, is a sacrifice that all of it is burnt up. None of it is consumed. So therefore, says the Beitzah, says the Tana, that if someone shechted, even in a mitzvah context, an oilas nedava b'Yom Tov, he's going to be chayiv malchus. So Amalei says Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi, when I hear these words, I know that the author of this Beitzah is following Beishamai. The Amr Lachmani, whose opinion does this reflect? Only Beishamai. The Amri, they are the ones, and that's the way Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi correctly interpreted our Mishnah, that the machlokes isn't only about is there a problem with transporting on Yom Tov or not. No, it's a much broader question. Mitoich or no mitoich. That they say that lo yamrin mitoich shehutra hoitzah l'tzoyrech. He's saying the word hoitzah because our Mishnah is speaking about hoitzah. Is hutram shaloi l'tzoyrech. But since Beis Hillel argues with Beishamai, and the argument isn't only about hoitzah, it's a much broader concept. Beis Hillel subscribes to mitoich. To Beis Hillel, ha'amri mitoich shutra hoitzah l'tzoyrech, hutram shaloi l'tzoyrech. And just like Beis Hillel says it regarding transporting, hachinami, here also, shechting and oila, I know that it's not food related. Mitoich shutra shchita l'tzoyrech, shchita will be permitted. Hutranama shaloi l'tzoyrech. And quickly to review, even according to the Rabbeinu Hananel, that has the most limiting application of mitoich, that it has to be l'tzoyrech mitzvah, it fits because shechting a carbon is a mitzvah. It's a tzoyrech mitzvah. Again, so you have one sheet of Rabbeinu Hananel, you have Rabbeinu Tam here, and other Rishonim that say there has to be some tzorech, and you have Shitas Rashi, the most lenient, that applies mitoich, even if there's no tzorech at all. I do want to just say one beautiful thing, that Rabbi Yosef Engel makes a correlation. This is based on the sheet of most Rishonim, that you can do what otherwise would be called a malacha if there is some benefit you get on Yom Tov. There's some tzorech to a din in Bava Kama. If you remember in Bava Kama, when we learned the Arba Avis Nizikin, so we were learning about shein, that if an animal with its teeth eats and damages other person's property, how the owner is responsible, and included in shein is any activity that the animal does for its own benefit. Like if the animal is scratching its back and on your car, on your carriage, and it ruins your carriage, that's included in shein. So says Rabbi Yosef Engel, what is shein? Eating. The fact that in Bava Kama, in the laws of damages, we correlate anything the animal does for its hana'ah is included in eating and shein, how great is that? So any type of malacha that's done for your tzorech, episode tzorech, is included in the heter of oichel nefesh, which is shein. Genius. Okay. Maskev lo rabam. Like this premise that which is going to stand. No, it's Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi understands that the machlokes of our Mishnah is not a limited machlokes only regarding is there an isur of haitzah or not. No. It's about mitoich. How do you know? How do you know that? They never said those words. Maybe it's a very limiting argument. It's a very limited, a very narrow argument. It was only regarding Eruv. Eruv is what Eruv Chatzeres. The enactment of King Solomon to have to make an Eruv Chatzeres is all based on the prohibition of carrying. No, it's Eruv Haitzah Shabbos ve'ein Eruv Haitzah Yantav Kamiflagi. Maybe they're arguing whether the whole problem of Haitzah, which is the Malacha Gerua, which is a novelty, even regarding Shabbos, maybe it doesn't apply by you. That's their argument. That Mar Savar, that's Beishamai, Eruv Haitzah Shabbos, and also Eruv Haitzah Yantav. And since you can't carry, you can't carry. You want to take a minor to his bris milah, I'm sorry, you can't carry. Mar Savar, Eruv Haitzah Shabbos, maybe that's Beis Hillel. And there is no problem at all with Eruv and Haitzah Yantav. Has nothing to do with Shechita. Maybe Beis Hillel will agree that if you shecht on carbon oil, you're going to be chayiv malchus. Who says it's about mitoich? Now, why would we even argue? We have to find some source that the prohibition of carrying does not apply to Yom Tov, and we have such a source. And we find words of admonition of Yirmiyahu where he tells the people, start keeping Shabbos. Stop transporting on Shabbos. He admonished the people. Now, he only admonished them for violating Shabbos. He never spoke about Yom Tov. Now, the counter argument will be is that when Yirmiyahu was speaking to a group of people that were not yet observant, sometimes you can't win it all. So at least don't carry on Shabbos. B'chlal, Shabbos is more strict. The penalty is skila. That would be a way of understanding it. But this is also, on the other hand, it might sound from this verse that he was not admonishing them for carrying on Yom Tov because there's no problem b'chlal. It's only about is Haitzah asur on Yom Tov or not. How do you know that? So this question, that's a classic answer that you are answering with a question. Maskiv la Rav Yosef. No, he's asking on Rabbah, which is really answering Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi. Elama'ata, if that would be the case, why do they not argue regarding Avanim? Now we're learning a very important Yesod. If people who learn, as we should, the Shulchan Aruch, when you begin Shin Ches, when we begin learning in Shulchan Aruch the laws of Muktzah, the Alter Rebbe brings 3 reasons for why did the Chazal say things are Muktzah. And the second one is the concept of Chashash Hoitza'a Naguba. That one of the reasons why things are Muktzah is because Chazal felt that if you're going to end up moving things, you might end up transporting it. Stones is a great example of real Muktzah. It's not even a keli. Linking muktzah to carrying would mean that if there is no prohibition carrying, then there will be no prohibition of muktzah. So if the ganze machlokes is whether there's haitzah and yom tov or not, challenges Rabbi Yosef to answer Rabbi Yitzchak against Rabbah, then our Mishnah should have recorded their argument regarding stones. Are stones muktzah or not? And if Beis Hillel pshat is that there is no isur of haitzah, then there should not be a muktzah on stones on Yom Tov. He makes no such statement. Ella midoloi mafligi ba'avanim. It's just an example. Or in any other muksa item, shmami, no. It's not Beitzah, shaloi l'tzoyrech pligi. It's about shaloi l'tzoyrech, it's about mitoich or not. It is a broader argument. Gavaldik. And furthermore, not only did Rabbi Yitzchak bar Rav Dimi understand so, Rabbah challenged it, so we're going to find yet another Amoida, the great Rabbi Yechanan, also clearly understands, Savar, that the topic of our machlekes is the mitoich, and not the limited argument whether there is an isur of Eitzah Yantiv or not, allowing us now to take Beis Hillel and to apply it to many other scenarios. Like, for example, according to Beis Hillel, if you shecht an oile in the temple on Yantiv, you won't be chayiv malchus. You can't eat it. So what? What did you do wrong? Shchita? Shchita is permitted. Why mitoich? Okay. The Tani Tanach made Rabbi Yechanan. How do we know that he subscribes to this better, broader understanding of this argument? So here we begin. So you had these Beitzah teachers. They know everything by heart. And he's reviewing by heart. And this is what he's quoting. Hamavashal gid hanosha b'cholav b'yantiv. If a person, God forbid, cooks the gid hanosha, the sciatic nerve, in milk on yamtiv, and he'll eat it, then he's going to be chayiv 5 times malchus. So let's get to the 5 times malchus. So number one, like mishum avashal gid, because he cooked a gid hanosha. Now hold on. On Yom Tov, you can only cook l'tzoyrech eichel nefesh. One is not allowed to eat a gid, right? There's no tzorech achila. So therefore, you're violating cooking a gid. Number 2, you're going to get malchus for eating the gid. Number 3, v'loike mishum mevashel basar b'chalav. Now I know in Chulin we're going to go through this whole details. We have a machlekes whether the gid, whether the sinew, the sciatic nerve has a status of meat or not. It doesn't have a taste. Obviously, this Tana subscribes to gid being qualified as meat. That's why you violate it for cooking meat and milk. And you're going to get malchus for eating basar b'chalav. And v'loike daf yud beis amud beis for havara. No, it's you kindled the fire on Yom Tov completely unnecessarily because you're not allowed to eat it. So quoted this genius, the memory genius. Amalei says Rabbi Yechanan to this Tana teacher, Puk Tana Labara. That's the classical example. There's Beitzah's corrupted. Go outside and teach it out. Don't come and teach it to me. And I'll tell you why. Because Havara ubishul ein lamish. It can't be that there is an issue of kindling or cooking, since kindling and cooking are malachas that are permitted for food, for kosher foods. So therefore we paskin like Beis Hillel, and obviously clearly Rabbi Yechanan understands that the question in our Mishnah is not about only hoitzah. It's about all of the malachas. Any malacha that is allowed l'tzorech eichel nefesh is allowed shaloi l'tzorech eichel nefesh. So therefore there won't be any problem with havara. And then he goes further. The im tim soloim Rabbi Yechanan tells him, well, you can say that Mishnah, it is a Mishnah. But who's the author of this Beitzah? Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai the amri lo yamrin mitech shutra hitzar l'tzorech. Hudam shel l'tzorech. And therefore, hachin nami lo yamrin mitech shutra havara l'tzorech. Hudam shel l'tzorech. Because taka, like we spoke out the Beis Hillel, given the amri mitech shutra hitzar l'tzorech. Hudam shel l'tzorech. Beis Hillel. Hachin nami Beis Hillel will hold mitech shutra havara l'tzorech. So he's telling him that if it's not corrupted, it's only following Beis Shammai. L'chayda, also go teach it outside because ain't a Mishnah. Or you can teach it inside, but let's make it clear it's Beis Shammai. Clearly, Rabbi Yechanan understands that our Mishnah is not limited to whether you can transport, carry on Yom Tov or not. No, it's much broader. And indeed, so we paskin, we reject Rabbah, and because of that, there are indeed many activities that one is allowed to do on Yom Tov, all beginning from the achasher ye'ochel l'chol nefesh hu levadoi. The levadoi is not such a levadoi because of the principle of mitoich. And this machlokes that we quoted, the Rabbeinu Hanan, Rabbeinu Tam and Rashi, is very relevant to all halacha l'maisa. How far do we extend certain activities even though it's not food related? Beautiful. Okay, second topic of today. Let's see how far we'll get. We spoke this out in the introduction. Quickly repeating it. Number one, there is a rabbinic prohibition to separate trumas or maisras, tithings, including challah, including the matanas on Yom Tov. However, something that you only made on Yom Tov, permissibly, like kneading a dough, like slaughtering an animal, you had no option of removing the challah prior. It did not exist prior. Now, I want you to know when it comes to the matanos, It's not like before you take off the zroya, the lechoyayim, and the keva, the right foreleg and the jaw with the tongue and the stomach called the keva. It's not that you can't eat any other part of the animal. No, it's not tevel. But when you're eating from an animal, there will come a point that you'll be coming so near the jaw or so near the tongue that you'll have to remove it. And you could remove it. No one debates that. But we have to be aware that included in the general prohibition of separating tithings on Shabbos and on Yom Tov is also the prohibition of delivering it. And when I say delivering it, it's not only about you bringing it to the kohen, it's also about the kohen coming to pick it up from you. That is something that's generally prohibited. No one debates that. So this is the premise of now appreciating the machlokes. So what is subject to an argument? You may not deliver. The prohibition stands. You may not deliver challah. You may not deliver what we call the gifts, the zroya, l'chayayim, and the keva, to a kohen on Yom Tov. Not only if you already made the dough yesterday, you separated the challah yesterday, you could have delivered it yesterday, but you didn't. Not only when you slaughtered the animal yesterday again, so you could have separated the matanos. The chiddush of Beis Shammai is bein shehur ma'hayoim, even if you only separated them today, which you were allowed to do. So you would have thought, oh, if you separated it today, you can deliver it today. Says Beis Shammai, no, you can separate it, but you still may not deliver it. However, Beis Hillel hold Matilde, that you are allowed to deliver it. In other words, here's very important. Beis Hillel allows you to deliver it not only, more in the Gemara, but just not only if you separated it today, but even if you separated it yesterday. Since if you would have made the dough today, you would be allowed to separate it. And therefore, Beis Hillel understands the takanas chachamim for you not delivering it doesn't apply. Even if de facto you did it yesterday, you still may deliver it. Good. Now, back and forth. Amar lahem Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai challenges Beis Hillel. Gzeira shava. This is not your classical Gezeira Shava. It's a Shem HaMushal. It's a borrowed term. Gezeira Shava means that l'chayda we should compare challah and matanos, which are included in the 24 gifts to a kohen. They are matana l'kohen. Why don't we should compare it to truma? Truma may never be delivered, and I'll tell you why. Because truma may never be separated on Yom Tov. This statement will be challenged in the Gemara, but based on the premise that truma may never be separated on Yom Tov, so therefore it may never be delivered. Truma is a matana l'kohen. So therefore, ksheim she'ein melichin es truma on Yom Tov. So Beis Shammai says to make everything the same as we should, consistent. Kach ein melichin es matanos. Even if you did separate the challah because you were allowed, but this law of not delivering should stand. Amru lehem Beis Hillel, no, we don't compare them because they're not similar. Im amartem betruma, indeed she'enoi zakai b'haramasa, because one has no right to separate trumas and Yom Tov. Again, we might find an exception, but that's the rule. Toimru b'matanois, that since she'zakoy b'haramasa, in the case where you make the dough on Yom Tov, in the case where you slaughter the animal on Yom Tov, so logic says you may deliver it. And let's extend it, since you may deliver that which was separated today, you may either deliver that which was separated yesterday. That's how we're learning the Mishnah. So that's the back and forth. Now, Kosal Kadaiton, that whenever the Mishnah said, Shohurmu Mahayoim, when the Mishnah is referring to gifts that were separated today, it's referring to a case where the animal was only slaughtered today. And by the way, everything we're learning now regarding the gifts, the same goes to challah. The Mishnah, the Gemara just doesn't want to mention both cases the whole time. So the Havamina is that whenever the Mishnah speaks about that which was separated today, is only referring to that which was slaughtered today. Whenever the Mishnah speaks about that which was separated yesterday, is referring to that which was even slaughtered yesterday. If that will be the understanding of the Mishnah, there's a big chiddush here on the side of Beis Shammai. It's going to come out that Beis Shammai prohibits delivering even that which could not have been separated yesterday. You only made the shechita today. Still, Beis Shammai says not to deliver it. Never. If that will be pshat in the Mishnah, then I want you to know, says the Gemara, that our Mishnah cannot follow Rabbi Yossi, it cannot follow Rabbi Yehuda, it can only follow Achedim. And what we will have now is very simple Gemara. We're going to have a Beitzah with all of these three Tanoim. Each one has another version of where they argued. And the way we just learned the Mishnah, then it must be Achedim. So let's go. Tanya, Omer Rabbi Yehuda, no one argues regarding the gifts. That what, even though you separated these gifts yesterday, if you also made a dough today, if you also shechted an animal today, according to Rabbi Yehuda, everyone agrees that not only could you deliver that which you were unable yesterday, once you are already making a delivery, you can add to it that which you could have done yesterday. Wow. Clear, not by Shammai. It's like, it's so lenient. Where is their argument? He limits it. If something was separated pre-Yom Tov, only that case, only pre-Yom Tov gifts, only pre-Yom Tov challah, could you deliver it or not? That is where Beis Shammai is machmir. They say ein moilichin, and Misillel says moilichin. Our Mishnah clearly let Rabbi Yehuda. But let's go on. Everyone had the back and forth. Beis Shammai danin challah umatonis is a matana l'koyin. Truma is a matana l'koyin. And kshem she'ein moilichin as a truma kach en moilichin as a matonis. To which Amalem Beis Hillel loy im amartem betruma, since like we had in our Mishnah, she'ein zakoy b'haramasa, there's no right to separate it on Yom Tov. Since matanes are allowed to be separated on Yom Tov, holds Beis Hillel, even though according to Rabbi Yehuda he's speaking about matanes that were separated yesterday, doesn't matter. You could deliver it. Because the takanas chachamim not to deliver is an extension of their takana not to separate. Any type of separation that theoretically could have been done today could be delivered today, even though this one was done yesterday. Amar Rabbi Yossi, he disagrees. And again, our Mishnah, based on the Kosalka Daitoch, will also not be the way Rabbi Yossi understands the argument. How does Rabbi Yossi understand the argument? All gifts, even pre-Yom Tov gifts, even Beis Shammai holds you can deliver it. Wow, he's the most lenient. By itself, wow. The only argument is Truma. Beis Shammai holds, ein moilichen, you may never deliver Truma on Yom Tov. Beis Hillel, again, this is not like our Mishnah. No, it's all new Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel doesn't subscribe to any prohibition of delivering even Truma. Moilichen. And v'kach hoyu Beis Hillel done, and now Beis Hillel were the ones that made this, so to say, gzeira shava b'shem hamushal. They said chalo matanos is one of the 24 gifts to a kohen. It's called matana l'kohen. Truma is a matana l'kohen. Kshem shemnefs matanos. The matanes, chalo, and the gifts both can be delivered no matter when, even if they only were pre-Yom Tov, even if that's the only ones you have. Kach melichin es truma. Truma is learned from chalo matanes. Since shezakoi b'haromasan, you have the right to separate them on Yom Tov. That's why Beis Shammai agrees, according to Rabbi Yossi, even if the only thing you have is that which was separated prior to Yom Tov, it could be delivered. That there isn't truma that can be separated on Yom Tov. Again, not our Mishnah, but yes, based on the Kosalka Daitach, at least it will fit with Achedim. Achedim oimrim, that's the third version in the argument. Al truma she'ein truma for sure may never be delivered. And now let's get into how they argue. Beis Shammai oimrim may never deliver. Beis Hillel oimrim that you may deliver. In other words, when Beis Shammai says, according to Achedim, that you may never deliver, he doesn't specify any difference. Beis Shammai across the board says you may never deliver. Mashman, the way we understand, not only may you not deliver something that was already pre-separated prior to Yom Tov, Beis Shammai says you can't even deliver that which was separated on Yom Tov. So it definitely fits like Achedim. Well, it's not ideal because, so Lema, it's only Achedim and not Rabbi Yehuda. It goes without saying not Rabbi Yossi. But also not Rabbi Yossi. Says Rabbi, no. I mean, the Kosalka Daitach, I won't accept the premise. Does it say here in our Mishnah that Beis Shammai prohibits Shohurmu Mahayoim Venishchetu Mahayoim? He never says that. Maybe Shohurmu Ketani Uloilam Shchitasain Me'emesh, that the case of our Mishnah in which Beis Shammai is a machmer is only because it was slaughtered yesterday, and therefore it could have been separated and delivered yesterday. only there is Beis Shammai machmer, but maybe, like Rabbi Yehuda learns, even according to Beis Shammai, if something only came to being today on Yom Tov, and you may separate it, you also may deliver it. Well, if that will be the pshat, later that our Mishnah is taka only Rabbi Yehuda and not achedim. Says the Gemara, not. No. That afilu teima achedim. However, ubahanoch the nishchutumei emesh, the Mishnah is only speaking about matanos that were slaughtered. I'm sorry, achedim only was speaking about matanos that were able to be transported yesterday, which basically means that's the problem, that achedim and Rabbi Yehuda are saying the same thing. Affecting Gemara, ihachi, if our Mishnah can be both achedim and Rabbi Yehuda, so then achedim and Rabbi Yehuda are saying the same thing. Says the Gemara, no. Ike benayu tefilla. Tefilla means that what happens if, now that we established something, even Beis Shammai, something that was slaughtered today could be gifted and delivered today. The whole machlokes is something that was slaughtered yesterday. Oh, what happens if you also have something that you slaughtered today and which may be delivered? Now the question is, will Beis Shammai at least be lenient by saying that since you can deliver that which came today as an accompaniment, can you also deliver that which was done yesterday? Here is where Rabbi Yehuda is mekel. Here is where achedim are machmer, and our Mishnah is not mentioning it because our Mishnah is not speaking about such a case. Bottom line is, not Rabbi Yossi, but at least it can be also according to Rabbi Yehuda. Let's move on. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda. Yes, let's go.
A quick general question on this whole delivery business. What's the inherent problem that we have bringing the gifts to the Kohen on Yom Tov?
So again,
what are we afraid?
We don't.
Carrying?
No. We don't want you to separate Trumas u'Maasros on Shabbos and on Yom Tov.
Right.
Included in that prohibition was don't deliver it.
But why is it better the day of versus the day before?
Because since on the day of challah and matanos are allowed to be separated, that's why there's a logic to say the whole delivery is prohibited as an extension of the prohibition on separating. That which you could separate, says Basil, you can deliver. And the way we just concluded, it's more than that. Even something that you separated yesterday. Since if you were to make a dough, you can separate and deliver the challah today. So Basil says, as far as challah is concerned, there is no problem with delivering. And Beis Shammai disagrees with that. That's how we just learned. Beis Shammai is moida that if you would have slaughtered it today, and therefore you separated the matanis today, you can deliver it today. But something which could have been done before is included in the general prohibition of not delivering on Yom Tov. Okay, weiter. Omar, Danny, delivering even if there's no haitzah. Don't forget that Beis Shammai doesn't allow you to transport, right? No, I take that back. It's food items. Huh?
Even if the separating was done yesterday, so what are we worried about? It's just delivery.
Doesn't matter. Once the Chazal said, don't separate, don't deliver, so it stands. Correct. That's normal. I want you to know that now that we have this Beitzah, and we mamish limited the argument by Truma, that we paskin like Rabbi Yossi, which is amazing. Which means that according to Rabbi Yossi, even Truma, which may not be separated, that's what you're saying, Danny. Delivering is a different thing. You can deliver it. Okay. Says the Gemara, Rab Toivi, the son of Rab Nechemya, Havale, Garba, the Chamra, the Truma. He had a jug of wine that was Truma. And also come to Rabbi Yosef. And he wanted to know, we paskin like Basil. We just don't know what Basil said. So can I follow Rabbi Yosef's Basil? Amr loy ma'u la'amtuye. Amtuye means to bring it, to deliver it to a kohen. Now is on Yom Tiv. Amalei, yeah, you can do that. That's so we paskin. Amalei, hachem Rabbeinu Shmuel. Yes, halacha ki Rabbi Yehuda. Weiter. Ush bezichnei, the host of Rava bar Rav Chanan. Hava lei isuri yasa de chardala. He had bundles of mustard stalks. Now, what's the issue? Amalei, he asked him, Mahu leferuchei umechal minayu b'Yom Tov. Can I crumble the pods to remove the seeds to eat it on Yom Tov? Oichel nefesh, food-related activities are allowed to be done only from a certain point on. Like we mentioned, if it's from the point where if you would have done it before Yom Tov, it would have been less fresh, That is what you are allowed to do at Yom Tov. Threshing, dash, and removing the mustard seeds from their stalks is included in the general prohibition of dash, threshing, should be prohibited on Yom Tov. On the other hand, it's it's like shchita, because you're eating it right away. You're not going to be taking the mustard seeds and do what you normally do, is to make it into mustard. No, you're going to be eating them right away. So maybe that's allowed. Is it allowed or not? Rabbi Bar Yochanan didn't know. When you don't know, you say, I don't know. What did he do? He helped him. Either the Ushbezichne went or Rabbi Bar Yochanan went, and Amalei quoted the Beitzah that yes, moilelin mililois, we are allowed to rub ears of grain, to eat the grains. Similarly, umefarchen kitniois, you can crumble legumes. That's something that is allowed. Now, why is it allowed? It's dash. So what you need, that Rashi adds, it's allowed because it's called doing a melacha kila achar yad, or doing a melacha shaloi kedarkoi. Since this is not the usual way, anything, my friends, that's a rule that is only generally something that's prohibited only rabbinically on Shabbos is completely permitted on Yom Tov. So a melacha that's done kila achar yad on Yom Tov is lechatchila mutar. Remember this rule. Let's go back into the Gemara. Okay. Eisvei Abaye. Now that Abaye hears this rule of Rava, it says, Hamoilo melilois me'elef Shabbos. If a person already with his hands, they rub the ears of grain, so you have grain with the chaff, you did not yet separate it. Separating on Shabbos, separating is problematic. We're speaking about Shabbos. So the next day, tomorrow on Shabbos, minapeyach miyad liyad v'oichel. You can throw it from one hand to the other. That's a indirect way of separating the kernels from the chaff, and you are allowed to eat it. So using your hands is permitted. Separating the chaff from the kernels, even in an unusual way, but using a keli, and that will be using a funnel, using a large plate. When you put any food item on a large plate, if the not good part is light, doesn't weigh as much, so then you simply tilt the plate. What rolls first, that which weighs more, that will be a primitive or a kila'achayad, an unusual way of separation. Even though it's unusual, it's asam midrabanan, you may not do it on Shabbos. However, on Yom Tov, like we mentioned, if you rub the ears before Yom Tov, and you should have already separated the chaff, but you didn't, now it's Yom Tov, not only Lamacher on Yom Tov are you allowed, minapech al yad v'oichel, can you throw it from one hand to the other, thus getting rid of the chaff. Not only is that allowed, but since it's Yom Tov, afilu b'konen afilu b'tamcha, you may even use utensils that were not made to sift. They were not made to separate, but you're making use of it, that's also allowed. But what may you not use? Avaloi betavlo, you can't use a proper board, which would be a keli that is used for such an activity. V'loi benafa, v'loi bekavra, nor with a fine sieve, nor with a coarse sieve, that may not be used. Why? So it's food related. So Rashi explains, because since these utensils are normally used to get ready to do boided to a large amount of kernels, a large amount for more than what you need on Yom Tov, it looks like you're doing something on Yom Tov for after Yom Tov. That's the problem. Now, says, all of this is the kasha of Abaye. What do we infer from this Beitzah? That's only me'ed of Yom Tov. The Beitzah is only addressing, what do we do now that you already rubbed the ears before Yom Tov? How do you completely get rid of the chaff? Which means, it can only be done on Erev Yom Tov, but on Yom Tov you may not rub it to take the kernels out of the chaff. Says the Gemara, Yom Tov. But since we are comparing Yom Tov to Shabbos, on Shabbos you for sure may not do it, so either the Tanim Erev Shabbos, Tanim Seifanami, Erev Yom Tov. Why are we bringing all this on over here? How is it related to our Mishnah? It's hugely related to the Mishnah, because the premise of our version in the Mishnah is Beishamai, who's the machmer, is comparing challah and matanos to truma. And the Hillel's counter is, no, don't compare truma, because truma may never be separated on Yom Tov. So therefore, truma may never be delivered. Challah and matanos, in the case that it only came into being on Yom Tov, for sure may be separated on Yom Tov. Now we have a problem. If you are permitting on Yom Tov for you to remove the kernels from the chaff, so it should be this. Now you should be allowed to separate truma. Why can you separate challah on Yom Tov? Because if God is allowing me to make a dough, and the whole obligation of challah is only from when I have a dough, then it has to be that I can separate challah. God allows me to shecht an animal, then the gifting of the matanis, or at least the separating of the matanis, can only be done after you shecht. Same thing over here, second to last line. Frek the Gemara, based on all of this, now that we established that you are allowed to rub ears on Yom Tov, okay, because imkein motzinu truma shezakoi b'haramasa. Don't forget, my friends, that truma, the obligation of truma is only when the item is a finished product. You can never separate truma when the kernels are in the chaff. The obligation should only begin from when you have the kernel separated from the chaff. If we found a permissible way of creating kernels, so to say, bringing forth kernels that are now edible, now you should be mechuyev to separate the truma. And v'hotanan, we learned in our Mishnah, that's the whole connection, that loy, Beis Hillel tells Beis Shammai, im amartem betruma, truma is different. Truma may never be delivered because truma may never be separated. Betruma she'ein zakoi b'haramasa. Now I found a case where you could separate, where you are allowed to separate truma on Yom Tov in this case. So the Gemara says, no, like Hashem. Like Hashem means everyone agrees that you are allowed to rub the ears of grain on Yom Tov. You are allowed to extract the kernels. Who says you have to separate truma? And that is actually a subject of machlokes between Tanoim. So Rebbe Yosi ben Rabbi Yehuda, Rebbe Taka holds that there is a scenario where one may separate trumas on Yom Tov. Rebbe holds that when you rub the ears and you took out some kernels, now you classify the kernels that they are a ready product. Any ready product has to be tithed. If it only became readied on Yom Tov, then you have to tithe it on Yom Tov, and you are allowed to tithe it on Yom Tov. However, our Mishnah, Beis Hillel, is following what we call the sheet of Rabbi Yosi ben Rabbi Yehuda, that holds that even though you, for a snack, you're going to rub the chaff, and you're going to take out some kernels, and you can do it, no problem, it's not called a ready product. If it's not called a ready product, there isn't a biblical obligation to tithe it. The rabbis are not going to say you have to tithe it because it's Yom Tov. And the rule is you can't tithe on Yom Tov. Where do we find this argument? Clearly, the Tanya. Hichnis shibolim lasois me'misa. Normally, shibolim are ears of grain. The obligation to tithe is only after you separated the kernels from the chaff, after you winnowed it, really normally after you place it into a pile and you smooth the pile. Now, if you brought the shibolim into your house, because you will only in your house separate it from the chaff and make a dough, so says the Beitzah that oichel mehem arai upater. There isn't a biblical obligation yet. There isn't a biblical obligation yet to separate trumas u'maisros. If there would have been a biblical obligation because you brought it into your house, then you would not even be allowed to snack from it. It's not called a finished product, and therefore, taka, on a rabbinic level, you can't make a proper meal. But even arai, if you're having a snack, you can have a snack even before you separated trumas. Why? Because shibolim is not called a finished product. There is no chiyuv b'chlal to tithe it. However, what happened? That's if you brought it into your house to make a dough out of it. But if you brought it into your house, if you brought it into your house, you're not making a dough out of it. You enjoy snacking on kernels. So if you brought it into the house to take out these kernels, then we view the shibolim and its entry, riyas pnei abayis, now you're obligated. That's gavaldik. And therefore, like we just explained, since according to Rebbe, when you bring in melilos in your house, you're chayv to separate trumos, and you can't separate trumos when it's still in the chaff, Now that we said L'kula Alma, you are allowed to remove by rubbing these ears, and you can remove the kernels, you're mechuyev to separate trumas biblically, and therefore you taka are allowed to separate truma, in this case on Yom Tov. However, the Beitzah Rebbe holds that you're still patir. In other words, that we don't, even though that you plan to eat the kernels, it's not called a finished product. On a biblical level, there is b'chlal no obligation to separate truma, and therefore coming back to Hilchas Yom Tov, it's correct what Beis Hillel says. There is never a scenario where the obligation comes into being, is chal on Yom Tov, and therefore you may never separate trumas on Yom Tov. God willing, to be continued.